Good evening. Good evening, commissioners. Good evening, staff. Feels like I'm starting to see you guys less and less after a big beginning to 2023, but it's good to see everyone tonight. I'd like to call the March 23rd Planning Policy Commission to order, and it is currently, somebody stole my clock, 6:34 p.m. Tonight's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff member or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Kristen, do we have a quorum this evening?
We do have a quorum, and Commissioner Milligan has an excused absence tonight.
Great, thank you. Our first item of business is to take care of some house cleaning. We have some minutes to approve. It's our expectation that everyone's read their packet, so we'll begin with the February 2nd meeting minutes. Are there any corrections to the draft minutes that were provided to you? Hearing none, the February 2nd minutes are approved, as well as the February 23rd meeting minutes. Are there any corrections staff needs to be made aware of? The February 23rd meeting minutes are approved. And our next item of business is public comment. The guidelines for public comments are as follows. For all of those who would like to speak during public comments, speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. And if you are attending virtually by computer or by phone and would like to speak during public comments, in addition to the above, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having any technical issues, please try to join the meeting using a different device. You can use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call in. Public comments are important. We take them seriously, and they are factored into the decisions that the Planning Policy Commission makes. Comments may be general or related to the topics we're going to discuss tonight. Please note that our comments are limited to 5 minutes. Do we have any comments tonight, Stephen?
Chair Voice, we don't have anybody attending virtually or in person for public comment, but I'm going to have you pause for a minute because there's a technical issue with the video.
Okay. Uh-oh. I think we all remember that one evening, right?
Sarah does.
Right. Keep going. Okay. All right, well, there being no public comments, we're going to move on to our regular business this evening, and that is the comprehensive plan, the housing element overview. I believe this is a continuation of our 101 with staff as far as what we're going to be learning and doing over the next coming months. Staff will be presenting existing conditions, state and county requirements, and gaps in Issaquah's housing stock. So Kristen, please go ahead with your presentation when you're ready.
Good evening. So Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner with the Community Planning and Development Department, and I have my friend Mike Stanger with me from ARCH, a Regional Coalition for Housing. You all might remember him. He came earlier this year and talked to us about affordable housing then. So as with any element or anything that you're doing or want to change, you probably need to know what it is in the first place. So tonight we're going to talk about not just affordable housing, but housing in general. The cost of housing, how many people are owners, how many people are renters, how much we have, how much we're supposed to have, that kind of thing, so that when you do make your decisions, you have a better basis for decision making. That doesn't want to work. So I've already said what our purpose is. There we go. Direction needed. So tonight, at the end, while we're talking, you all consider a few things. One is, does the housing vision correctly capture the intent of the housing element and the policies and goals that are in there? Are there other specific topics that you all want to cover? Primarily what we're covering are state requirements, county requirements, and is there anything else that you guys want to consider as a policy change? And then is there any information or feedback that you guys will need to help you make a decision that we haven't provided so far? Okay. So if we're going to ask you to consider the vision, we ought to tell you what the vision is. So preserve and enhance neighborhoods while improving housing opportunities for the city's diverse population and local workforce. That's what it is now. Okay. Currently, we have, or as of April 1st of 2022, we had 17,849 housing units in the city. Every year we submit information, which I'm about to do again, but we submit information to the Office of Financial Management about how many things have been permitted, how many units have actually been completed. Then they put together a report, and how many units are included in each of those building permits. And then they submit back to us our total count, and along with population estimates for us, and population estimates for each type of housing too, because they estimate that, maybe 2.4 people live in a single family house, but maybe 1.7 people live in a 5-unit or more complex. So for existing housing, the breakdown, we have just over 8,000 single family houses here, 520 duplexes, 930 tri and fourplexes, and 5 and up, or more than 8,000 5 units and up, so multifamily buildings. Again, that's from the Office of Financial Management. So of our units, 60% of them are owned and 40% of them are rented. By the way, you guys feel free to jump in and ask questions at any time. You don't have to wait. So I'm going to talk about housing target. So we have just, almost 18,000 housing units right now, right? So in 2019, we were asked to do a buildable lands inventory, which shows us how much land is vacant, how much is redevelopable, and how much can't be built on at all. So when we did that, we look at everything that's built up through 2018, right? And at that point, we had 12,159. We had room for 12,159 acres, okay? So we go through these negotiations with the county and all the other jurisdictions that are called core cities, which is what we are of a certain size. And we determine targets that are then approved by King County, by the Puget Sound Regional Council, and then adopted by our city as well. Our target from 2019 through 2044, so 25-year period, is that we need to accommodate 3,500 units out of the 12,000 that we have available, which leaves us a capacity of still 8,659 units. So our adopted housing target is 3,500 units. So that's much less than our actual capacity for housing. I'm going to let Mike jump in here.
Knew I was going to forget that. So we're going to dive in a little bit, the shallow end of the affordable housing topic here. And just to refresh your memory, we'll cover some basic definitions and guidelines, which will come into play with some of the data that I present later. So one term that we need to understand to begin with is the area median income. This is the basis for income limits in affordable housing, as well as they are used to calculate rent or price limits for affordable housing. It's the standard used that is published by HUD every year, usually in the spring. And the area in the area median income, they generally correspond to metropolitan statistical areas, if you're familiar with that term, or that are defined by the Census Bureau. And in our case, our area is King and Snohomish County combined. So basically, HUD takes the median family incomes that are found in the American Community Survey, the most recent one, and then they update it to the current year using the Consumer Price Index and local housing costs and other factors. And they determine a median family income for a family of 4. And we sometimes call that the 100% AMI for a family of 4. Then to come up with income limits for affordable housing programs, we adjust that for family sizes. 70% of the 4-person family will be a 1-person family, and 80% of that will be for 2 people, and 90% for 3 people, and so on. Then if the city has, or a program has affordability goals or limits that are, below 100% of median, then say at 50% or 80%, then we'll take that percentage of those figures. Those then become the income limits for initial eligibility to live in affordable housing. I just provided a few sample figures here to give you an idea of what those look like. But it's also interesting, I checked these against the minimum wage. So if you're interested, a 1-person minimum wage, as you know, is $15.47, or something. So annually, that's $32,740 a year if you work full-time. And that equates to 34% of AMI for 1 person. Two full-time minimum wage earners would be about $65,500, and that's about 61% of median if there are just 2 people in the family. But if it's a 3-person family, then that equates to 54% AMI. And if they have a 4-person household, then it would be 47% AMI. So you can see how these things are scaled according to the family size, which is a reflection of, then becomes a reflection of how much money you need to be able to support that family. I should also note here that if you compare this to King County figures or Seattle or some others, you may find some slight differences because there are different agencies or programs may have different ways of calculating. We calculate from the 100% AMI 4-person. HUD also publishes a 50% AMI, and those are used by some agencies to calculate income and rent limits. So it can be confusing sometimes. Somebody says, well, how come, this program has these income limits and you have these? Well, there's just some flexibility to define things a little differently, but they're usually within $100 or so of each other. Okay. So let's convert this to what people can actually afford to pay and how the rent limits are set. As you probably know, housing is considered affordable if it costs less than 30% of the resident's gross income. In our the land use or tax incentive programs that we administer, we set the rent limits at 30% of the maximum income of an eligible household, regardless of the household that's actually living in the unit. So the household may have a lower income or a bigger household or something, but the rents will be based on this schedule. That's a little different than what you might hear from some public housing or subsidized programs where the resident actually pays 30% of their own income. Most land use tax exemption programs, things of that nature, use this method where they're just, regardless of who you are, this is what your maximum rent could be. But still, we do the adjustments for the size of the unit, the number of bedrooms, and the affordability level that the city's looking for. You want to take?
Well, sure. I mean, he could do this too, but in the city, we have 1,032 affordable units. And when I say affordable units in this case, that means that these are units that have covenants attached to them. So they are affordable for either 50 years or for the life of the project. And we have 819 that are at or below 80% of the area median income, and 213 that are between 81% and 120% of area median income. Yes.
I'm curious, of those units, how many locations is that? How are they spread across the city?
I actually have a map of it, but not with me. It's coming out. Just did the draft. But most of those, the ownership is in the Highlands, Issaquah Highlands. Well, everything from 80%, 81% to 120%, those ownership units are in the Highlands. There are, I can't remember exactly how many in the Highlands, but there are only 33 in the Highlands that aren't ownership at that level. But as far as the rest of them, they're spread out pretty evenly throughout the city. Yeah. But Highlands, for those who don't know, got so many, they had 350 at 80% or below that they were supposed to provide, and 350 between 81 and 120 as part of the development agreement. So that is why the Highlands, that's one of the reasons the Highlands has so many.
So this doesn't include project-based vouchers, correct? So like Discovery Heights, for example, has a certain number of project-based, but that, because that's not covenanted, that wouldn't be in this number?
Well, they actually do have a land use covenant as well.
They do, okay.
And this doesn't include tenant-based vouchers, but it does include project-based. It includes sources other than city incentives as well. It has some housing authority projects and some tax credit projects as well. Anything that's regulated in some form. Yeah, okay. So let's talk about the population overall. The current population in Issaquah, majority of the households make over 120% of median income. 35% make less than the median, and 27% make 80 AMI or less, including the 11% at the lowest income group, that's 0 to 30 AMI. Now let's compare that to the affordability of the housing that we have now. And this is data from the American Community Survey, so based on what people reported are their housing costs. And here, the housing costs make 37% of the homes affordable for people making median income, or 17% are affordable to anyone making 80% of median or less. There's not a wild discrepancy, but a noticeable one there. But the affordability shortage becomes more acute when you consider that many middle and higher income people spend less than 30% of their incomes on housing. So my family, for example, have lived in the same house for 20 years, and we didn't buy up when our incomes rose. We stayed in the same house. So, and the housing industry doesn't build lower cost housing without subsidies or incentives. So that means that fewer and fewer housing units are available as the city grows. And as a consequence, lower income people have higher cost housing to choose from, and we end up with people who are what we call housing cost burden. They're spending more than 30% of their incomes on housing. If they're spending more than 50% on housing, then we call that severely cost burdened. And we find that those are people who the housing costs are eating in so much of what they would otherwise spend on medical costs or food, clothing, and so forth, that they're really on the edge of becoming homeless. At the last count, 20% of the renters in Issaquah were severely cost burdened, another 22% were cost burdened.
So one of the requirements that's being considered right now is, by the county, is that they would assign affordable housing targets to individual jurisdictions. So in the past, we've all just sort of accepted the county's target, which was, we want 40% of our units to be affordable, but that just isn't coming out right regionally, and the spread, it's hard to achieve, for one, and it hasn't produced a good balance. So what the county is doing is that they have looked at the targets, that 3,500 number that I gave you. Every city has a different target, right? You know, Kirkland's is like 21,000, Redmond's is 22,000, ours is 3,500. So they look at the targets, and of those new units that are coming in, they're also looking at what affordable units we have in place already. And we're saying, they're looking at it and saying there are gaps in the 80 to 100% area. So Issaquah needs to take more of those. But they're looking at our target and they're saying X percentage of your units need to be affordable. X percent of your new units need to be affordable, and we're breaking it up into these different AMI categories. Does that make sense? Okay.
Right, so this is actually coming from changes in the State's Growth Management Act that were enacted a couple of years ago. And it says that every housing element has to include an inventory and analysis of existing and projected housing needs that identifies the number of housing units necessary to manage projected growth, that's the 3,500, as provided by the Department of Commerce, including units for moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income households, and emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive housing. So what we had in Issaquah in 2019 is in the top line there. 30 AMI, breaking up the income groups from 30 AMI and breaking up the 30 and below into permanent supportive housing or not. That's what the PSH stands for. And then the middle row, 2044, total need, is what the Commerce Department said. Well, Commerce gave each county-wide figures, and that the King County groups, in collaboration with city planners, elected officials, and so forth, have come up with an allocation method, which is shown in that middle row. And so these are the numbers that are proposed for Issaquah. And then the difference is in that bottom row. That bottom row in the tan colored columns to the right of emergency, those add up to the 3,500 total growth target. So
Actually, little clarification. It's not 3,500, because that would mean that every unit that came in, every new unit that came in, we would expect to be affordable. So it does come out to like 3,100 units that they're hoping would be affordable, to up to 120%.
this is the same data, just shown in percentages, kind of comparing the baseline to what the total need is. And I want to make clear that what the comp plan is accountable for here is to plan for and accommodate, is the words that are in the Growth Management Act and the countywide planning policies. Housing for these needs by 2044. The city won't be held accountable for what actually gets built or what the actual affordability is, as long as the city implements the plan. So you can't adopt, a housing element that says we'll do these things and then set it aside and not do it. That would make the city vulnerable. But you do also have to have a plan that shows it's, that it's reasonably possible. These are my words, these are not official words. I'm trying to paraphrase the best of my ability here. But it has to be a reasonable plan that that shows that affordability levels or those needs could be met. over the next 20 years. So we want to take a little bit of time here just to reflect on what Issaquah is already doing, what some options are, by looking at what other cities have been doing, and then see where the conversation goes. Then we want to talk a little bit more about the state law, I think. So if you might recall from the last time I was here, Lindsay Masters and I talked about some of your programs. And Issaquah has done a lot over the last 30 years to create and preserve affordable units. The vast majority of those, about 860 of them, I think, came through development agreements, mostly on Issaquah Highlands, as Kristen said. But there are other provisions in the code that provide opportunities for development agreements, like for cluster housing and things that also lead to affordable units. You have inclusionary zoning in Central Issaquah District, which has only produced 11 affordable units so far, but has a lot of potential to do more there. I believe all or nearly all of the affordable units in Issaquah have received fee waivers or partial fee waivers or exemptions from impact fees, that kind of thing. And then the city's contributed a lot to the Arch Trust Fund, which has leveraged funding from other Arch members and other funders to help produce affordable housing here and across the Arch sphere. And the city has actually been also one of the leaders in offering public land, either free or at reduced cost to make feasible housing by nonprofit housers. The big difference between Issaquah and other Arch members, from my standpoint, other cities have relied more heavily on inclusionary zoning as mandatory affordability that comes as a result from upzoning or things of that nature. And other cities have also used the multifamily tax exemption. Issaquah has a provision ready to go. And if the city decides to make that available in a wider geographic part of the city, I think that will probably get a lot of use. Commercial linkage fees, I have to admit, are not a real thing yet. It's kind of something that one or two cities have adopted but haven't made much use of, but all of our cities are looking closely at this as a kind of a equivalent of inclusionary housing for commercial development, where the developers would pay a fee to help support affordable housing for the demand for housing that they're created through their increased employment. And like Issaquah, other cities have used, have funded the trust fund and helped projects with public land. We should also not feel like the city has to do everything here, that a comp plan can and really should spread the responsibility around, right? Yeah, after all, the city doesn't build housing, we know that. The King County Housing Authority does and has been active in Issaquah for a long time. But there are other actors that I think it's fair to say should be part of this plan. And the CPPs and state law actually require that the plan include collaboration actions in concert with other actors. So that will be part of the planning process going forward. The affordable housing needs are just one of the challenges in this housing element update. And the you'll see a lot of cross-pollination between the GMA amendments and the new CPP amendments. I've bulleted here what I think are some of the major substantive additions or changes. Some of the other CPPs, and there are several pages of housing policies, but they have stronger language now than they used to, but they're basically not changed. These are some of the things that I think reflect the emphasis of the CPPs that we'll have to take into consideration for the housing element update. We've just shown you a tip of the iceberg on the data that we have, but the CPPs require quite a bit of additional data and analysis that we'll present to you. That'll be part of the process of actually evaluating the effectiveness of the programs that you have in place and the resources that have been available in the past, and trying to identify gaps. Also, there is emphasis on identifying and documenting racially discriminatory and exclusive land use and housing policies, risk of displacement, other exclusions in housing, and policies to make up for those gaps. And then the CPPs also provide for a new level of comp plan review than has been done in the past. So I can't say exactly what this is going to look like. I'm not sure anybody knows for sure. They're still working on the policies that will define what the process will be, but both the Affordable Housing Committee and the Growth Management Planning Council of King County will be examining all of the housing elements closely to try to make sure that, as I indicated earlier, that the policies and strategies and the plans, show a reasonable level of support and confidence that those needs can be met in the future.
So as I mentioned, there were both county and state requirements that we're doing, and they overlap quite a bit, as Mike said. So the inventory and analysis the state is requiring, they want to identify capacity of land for all housing units, so from very, very low income up through 120% up to special needs. Identify and address policies that result, again, in racially disparate impacts and displacement and exclusion, and then address and begin to undo racially disparate impacts, displacement, and inclusion on housing. So, I don't know why I find that funny. In 2021, the state adopted House Bill 1220, and it requires that cities accommodate and plan for very low income through, or extremely low income through moderate income housing, so everything that we've talked about. And we do that. We allow it everywhere right now. They also ask that we accommodate and plan for emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive housing. Those we don't do. So that'll have to be a change both in our policies and in our development regulations. And then adopt anti-displacement policies, which we don't have in our code, and inventory and monitor. And we actually have an inventory right now. It's what I told you I just mapped but didn't bring with me. And to monitor it, which we kind of do, but we haven't, we monitor it pretty well, and it comes out in the housing report card every year. So not a whole lot of changes here, but there are some that need to be made, and a big discussion that needs to be had, because there are different ways to accommodate for the emergency housing and the emergency shelters. And then one that's being talked about, it's been passed in the House and it's on its way to the Senate and will likely be passed, is House Bill 1110. And it says that we must allow 3 units per every lot that allows primarily housing on it, or every zone that's zoned for primarily residential use. So that would pretty much be our multifamily high zoning all the way down through conservancy residential. And then you would be required to allow 6 units within 1/2 mile walking distance of a major transit stop. They haven't quite defined what major transit stop is yet. Right now, based on the definition, we don't have one, because we don't have rapid area transit yet. But it hasn't been fully defined, so we'll see what that turns into. And then 4 units would be allowed anywhere in the city on a parcel, as long as one of those units is affordable at 60 or 80, 60%, 60% rental and 80% ownership. So those are things that are being talked about. They will probably get passed, and there's a little more to it, but I didn't, we'll get into the finer details once they figure it out themselves, So that's what we have as far as presentation. Again, we want you guys to start talking to us now. Let's have a discussion about the vision, which take your time with the vision. Doesn't have to be done tonight. When I do visions, I will actually write out my outline first and then go, okay, here's the thesis of the vision. So, people work in different ways. So it doesn't have to be decided tonight. And are there any topics that aren't addressed here that are being required by the state and county that you want to see us talk about? And then is there information or feedback that will help you that we didn't provide, aside from the map that shows everything that we have and where? So that's it. Would you like me to stop sharing?
No, I think we can keep these up.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stanger. Thank you, Kristen. Commission, it's our turn. Please.
Yes, hello, this is Commissioner Alma. Just a quick question. What's being proposed in that bill, is that the minimum or the maximum in regards to 6 units or 3 units per lot? If a developer, go on, please.
The minimum.
Okay,
Yeah.
very well. Thank you.
And if I understand this correctly, Kristen, both bills, these are what's allowed. It's not necessarily that it's what's going to be built. So am I getting this right? These bills don't have as much teeth as it sounds?
It's true. It's like our targets. They say that we have to plan for and accommodate 3,500 units, but we don't have to build 3,500 units. We're not developers. So same thing here,
Right.
is that they would say that you have to allow 3 lots or 3 units per lot, but we don't have to build that. We don't have to require that. You just have to allow it.
Right, because that was something in the very beginning I'm getting a little hung up on. I understand how it works with development agreements. I understand how it works with multifamily. How does that work with like a single-family house, like a single-family residential that someone is either using a builder or building themselves? I mean, does that even equate? Does that even become part of the calculation, or not really? I mean, I see how it works with multifamily. I can't get in my head like single residential housing, how any of this works.
So there are a few different, I live in Kirkland where this is already allowed. And there are a few different scenarios. I know in one case, I just saw a house that was for sale, and there was an existing house, and they built 2 ADUs behind it. And in Kirkland, you're allowed to sell those ADUs, even if it's on one lot. So that person went in, they had their single-family house, they had a really big backyard, they put in 2 much smaller single-family houses, and they sold those. Or, on another one, where they're doing more of, is you have a deeper, older lot, and you put 3 small houses on there with a driveway that accesses all of them.
So when it comes to private property, it's more about enticing either the seller or the property owner to be able to utilize the land a little bit better to make a profit themselves, sell it, and then offer more affordable housing to the next group of people that are moving in behind them.
Right, and again, these don't have to be affordable, the 3 units, they can be, one of those ADUs was selling for over $1 million, so they don't have to be affordable.
It's all subjective, right?
Yeah, they have to be allowed. Now, if you're gonna do 4, one of those does have to be affordable. Yeah.
Commissioner Lewis.
I'm curious, I think one of the holdups for me as I've been following this bill is thinking about level of service, and specifically for our community, how we think about sewer, water, transportation, right? That there's more to the story than just housing units, and how the state expects us to be able to accommodate for that in a community like ours that has a very geography, right, is very interesting to me, because not all communities are the same. We're very unique, and I think that this right now leaves a lot of questions that Issaquah needs to be prepared to say, this is what we will and won't do, which means having policy discussions with the public in these forums to be able to say, this is how and where we're going to do it, to be very specific. Because as I read it, it means that when we get single lots asking to have zoning up, to be upzoned, right now we say, well, we want it in the valley floor, right? We're following our policy decisions, but this changes that pretty dramatically. And so it's concerning, might be a good word, right?
Right, and you bring up a very good point, and we've had lots of conversations about that internally, and our mayor has spoken with other mayors and legislators and said, our topography doesn't allow for this in some ways, because we need transit to accommodate all these people, but we can't get transit up on the top of Squawk Mountain or up Talus. Those roads are too steep, especially when it's snowy. Or, yeah, the infrastructure, we need water, we need sewer, we need all these things, and we have to be able to accommodate that, and in some places it's just not possible.
So I think what's interesting then is to think about how we measure the fallout, right? What we know we need to meet and how we do it means what are the things that need to come in line for it. If you're going to build in this way, then what are the other costs that are going to be associated with it? Obviously these homes aren't going to be able to have a septic drain field. So that means that we need to think about how our system is able to accommodate just, our wastewater alone. It's a complicated puzzle.
Yeah, this is Sarah Bader. This might be a dumb question because I don't really know how the process works, but is some of those, like, can this lot accommodate this or not, just kind of happen naturally through, like, land use code or building code, that sort of thing, so that this development can only happen on lots that actually can accommodate this kind of increased density?
Right, there's not going to be there wouldn't be any lot line adjustments to make sure that all the lots can accommodate this or anything like that. Yeah, it would just be a matter of amending our code to say this is allowed here.
Yeah.
And then if you can fit 3, great, do 3,
Commissioner Kennedy.
Well, one, I'm really looking forward to that map, because that was my question too. I wanted a map with all kinds of dots of where single-family homes versus multifamily homes versus affordable housing. So I'm looking forward to your map. Question, we have to accommodate for this housing, but what I'm hearing you say is it's not mandatory. So is there a system for encouraging it? How does that work if we have to accommodate for it, but we're not builders? How does that work? Do we have enticements?
For affordable housing, yes. Mike mentioned all the incentives that we have with the fee waivers and land, and sometimes we actually require it in the case of affordable housing, like inclusionary zoning, or if you're going to do development bonus, then you're going to go above your base height or above your base FAR, then you're required to do it. But as far as the market rate housing goes, no, you're right. You just have to say in your code, this is allowed here. And then if somebody wants to come build it, I don't think that there's going to be a whole lot of enticing that has to be done in some cases, in some locations, but yeah, they would, there's no forcing of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was something I was looking at too, is as far as Mr. Stanger's presentation, it shows, the things that were working. And that was another question I wanted to ask. But as far as the things that are working, we have the development agreements, we have waivers, city partners like Arch, funding through the city, through Arch, and then even a little bit of land use. But ultimately, it seems like those are the ways people get it. Again, like you said, you can have inclusionary zoning if you're starting a new development like Talus or Issaquah Highlands. I don't know how many more of these are down the pipe. But for the most part, it sounds like enticing people is how we're going to get what we want. And then allowing certain developers to build, which kind of scares me a little, because once they have that long leash, they can, we don't want tenements by any means. But am I getting that right? It really has been enticements for the last
Yes.
20 years.
Yeah. And I'm trying to pull up, I am listening to you. How do I make this go away? Do you know? I pulled up the map. I'm going to share it with you. This is just not the best way to see it. Do you see it? Well, I'm going to, let's see. I'll just try it this way. Okay. Yeah, this is going to be hard to see because I don't know how to make this little ribbon go away. But starting from the top, you can see we have we have some units over here, South Cove. Providence Point, we don't have any affordable units up there. You can see that in Issaquah Highlands, there are quite a few, and these are all the 80% and belows, quite a few in Issaquah Highlands. And then you get a lot down here, you start to get some in Old Town, and down on Old Town and Squawk Mountain down here. So really kind of the central and southeast parts of the city. And then over here in Tallis, this is Rosecrest that has 50 units, and then there's only one unit right here in Tallis. But then this map also includes a table of all the units, the names, where they're located, whether they're rental or ownership, total units, affordable units, and then at what AMI each of those units is. So this hopefully will come out next week, and I'll send you guys the link. But there's one in here for the up to 80%, and there's also one that's above 80%. And you can see that this is Issaquah Highlands, and that's where they're all located. So, all right.
Chair Voice, I think to your point, I remember this commission did a lot of joint commission meetings back in, I think, 2016, 2017. We spent about 2 years really trying to work a lot on how we were going to get more affordable housing in the city of Issaquah. And it was very interesting because we had a lot of options in front of us, and we all wanted the enticing route, right? We all wanted the carrot and not the stick. We looked at a lot of different things, and we chose that as a community. And I think what's really interesting is to think about how we're tracking it. Whenever we do our housing report card, we like to see who's utilizing what's being used, what do we need to kind of think about how we're changing those incentives and what's working and not working. But being able to track what are we getting a real result from, it's going to be a very interesting thing moving forward in terms of especially the state bill, and making sure that we're attracting and managing it in a way that's kind of slow rolls it, I think, in a way that we're able to get a hold of.
I know we got more questions in us. We got more questions in the tank. Vice Chair Bader?
Yeah, I have questions to take us down a little bit of a different path. My first question is there a waiting list for affordable housing in the city?
We don't keep a waiting list per se. We have what we call it a mailing list or a contact list, or kind of a registry of people who are interested in affordable housing through our programs and in our community. So we'll contact them when opportunities become available, whether it's home ownership or rental.
Okay. So do we have a sense of, like, I know we have our targets, but like to actually meet demand for affordable housing, how many units we would need, or how far off we are?
To meet, not from that waiting list. What your question makes me think of, though, is how just basically how many do we need?
Right.
And the county is defining that, is telling us what that is.
Okay, so that's that number. Okay. Yeah. And then in terms of those, whatever it was, 3,100 units that kind of fall in that, do we have targets for how many of those we want to be rentals versus ownership?
Good question. No, that's not defined in there. The city could define that yourselves.
Because I'm thinking about like then the kind of goals and policies around like discouraging displacement and that sort of thing, and like encouraging paths to home ownership as part of this.
I think there's kind of a natural, I'm not sure what the right word is, barrier is not exactly what I'm looking for, but home ownership is going to be very difficult for people who make less than 50% of median,
Right.
regardless, even if the entry price is affordable to them. So that's going to limit your ability to produce affordable units at, at those price points.
And then last thing that I think would be interesting to see too is we kind of talked about numbers as a whole, but to see that kind of the same breakdown by race and ethnicity and what that looks like across the city, I think would be another kind of good data point to have going into these conversations.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Just looking at the data by race and ethnicity
Oh,
instead of just the
absolutely,
population
yes.
level.
Yeah, we will be bringing that.
Commissioner Altamore.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to Vice Chair Bader's first question. So if I take off my commissioner hat and put on my day job hat, this is what I do all day. And I didn't recognize you, Mike, when I walked in because I don't normally see you here. But it's hard to talk geographic city lines when you have the need conversation because we're also close together, right? If you're looking at Snoqualmie versus Bellevue, Issaquah, Redmond, Kirkland. But I know that the work, I'm a member of the Eastside Housing Roundtable, and the work that we've been doing on the needs assessment around what those needs are, the numbers are astronomical. And so the big conversation was, do we actually put out the real number because it would freak people out too badly, or do we put out a number that is a little bit more accessible, right, that people could actually accept? And as an employer here on the east side that is nonprofit, so we pay, unfortunately, lower wages, I know that our staff continue to live further and further and further away. And so that's another part of the need in speaking to what is the need in the city of Issaquah versus what is the need for the employers within this region to actually be able to have people who live closer. So the numbers that, when I mentioned a couple weeks or months ago about the targets being the floor, I really do see the targets being the floor because the need is so excessive for people who don't make the very highest wages in the region.
Your day job will come in handy. Thank you, Commissioner Altamore. How do we compare to other cities? I know it's, you don't have to name them, but as far as Issaquah, in terms of our disparities with people at different AMIs, are we as out of whack or out of balance as other cities? Are we doing better? I mean, I know our numbers provided by King County, the 3,500 number, that's in relation to our size and what our capacity is. But as far as how we're doing, like if we were to get a report card, would we be doing better than other Puget Sound communities, other East Side communities?
I will be more than happy to bring in, real data that you can make those comparisons. But having, done some presentations to show, kind of what works and what doesn't, including some with Kristen. Issaquah compares favorably with cities of your size. But if you look at, those gaps or that affordable housing need that you need to plan for the countywide planning policies, every city is just, those numbers are enormous, and it's, they're all big.
Right, and it speaks to Commissioner Altamore, I mean, the need.
Right.
But as far as we've done so far with what we've
As far
been
as the
able to
city's
do.
effort in the past goes, it compares strongly with other arch communities.
And the reason I ask is it goes to Commissioner Lewis's point about the things that we're doing well. There's things that we can improve on, but if this carrot is continuing to work, is that the method we want to go? So that's kind of more of where I'm interested in is if we're doing a good job and we're favorable to cities of our size, maybe the carrot method is working. Maybe we just need to expand it to try and reach targets that we're getting hounded down now from the county. See if we can't spice it up a little bit.
Well, when I've classified the data, there are mandatory programs and there are voluntary programs, and then there are development agreements. which are sort of neither fish nor fowl, right? I mean, a developer is, as I understand it, it's kind of worked like this. A developer comes into city of Issaquah and wants to do something different than is allowed in the code. And the city offers, well, we might let you do that, but we'd have to do a development agreement. And you'd have to convince us that we're getting enough in public benefits as the value that we're changing to allow you to do what you want. And if you don't convince us, then we're not going to give you the development agreement. So I've never been really sure whether to call that mandatory or voluntary.
Arm twisting.
And Issaquah has been very productive with their development agreements, much more than any other community that I can point to.
Okay.
But how much can you continue to do that? I don't know.
Well, and that's a point I was going to bring up, is that, you know, most of our units have come from Central Issaquah Development Agreement, but the city's trying to move away from
Issaquah
development
Highlands.
agreement. Issaquah Highlands. But the city's trying to move away, or is starting to move away from development agreements. One is because we don't really have the land to do it anymore, and two
Right.
is because they create an entirely different code. And one of the reasons we just did Title 18 was to try and get everything into one place. So, you know, trying to move away from those, which means that we need to find other ways, like multifamily tax exemption in conjunction with inclusionary zoning or something like that. I don't know what it is, but that's top of my head. Yeah.
No, that's good to know. Like you said, if one of our tools is getting dull, you need to find something else to replace it. Okay. Commissioner Lewis?
You know, when we used to talk about this at PPC, it was always paired with our jobs numbers, right? It's hard to separate the two. And I think it's worth bringing up that there's been a lot of discussion, but not a lot of movement on how we really accommodate the live, work, play in our mission. And so while there is great need and not necessarily everybody wants to live where they work, being able specifically to have civil servants, teachers, firefighters, right, the vital roles that we need to keep our community moving, having the ability for them to be able to live in our community is something that's very difficult, right? If you make a teaching salary, you're not able to afford to buy in Issaquah, right? And being able to have that equity and to be able to build true assets for your family is something that's really important. And so how we support that, how we do that is a continuing discussion that when we talk about the housing element needs to not be forgotten. Is how we say, yes, all people are valuable, and there's also very real roles in our community that need to exist, and we need to make sure that we make room for them, and how do we do that?
Absolutely.
May I ask, what other information can we bring back to you?
I'd like to know a little bit more about the emergency housing. Again, I'm, you know, and I know that's unclear because the bill currently, I believe, is still going through. No, that one's already passed?
That one passed. That's House Bill 1220.
Okay, so I'd like to hear more about that, what that means, what that looks like, because you mentioned that there's two areas where Issaquah has been successful, or we've already been proactive about it, and I think that one is where you said we haven't really done anything about it. So yeah, the two areas where we haven't done much, and I know you guys were already going to tell us, but yeah, that's a question mark in my mind. That one, the anti-displacement policy, both those things I'm interested to hear more about.
And I will let you know, so the state had asked us to do the emergency shelter requirements. They asked cities to do that a long time ago, but a lot of cities postponed it for various reasons. So right now, we default to the state's draft ordinance that they've adopted, which means that shelters currently can go anywhere where hotels can be located. So right now, they could come here, and it would be under the state's, but it would be under the state's ordinance.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, the more information about that, the better. I don't know if these are transitional housing. Again, you know, not to get controversial, I don't know if these are facilities for people that are having mental health problems or addictions. I mean, they're two very different things. So, yeah, the more information we could get on that, I'm sure the public would appreciate it.
One piece of information I always find very interesting is age differences, right, of our population. And poring over census data when it's released is always really interesting to see, especially for Issaquah as a community that traditionally thinks of itself as a family place, right? And we think about that with our housing units is what we're accommodating. But ever more, I think it's over 30%, 32% of our population is actually single people, and being able to have the data of who is in our community, who are we trying to serve, also along age lines, what percentage of our population is looking to age in place and age out, right, are important factors when thinking about housing units and what we need also from that perspective.
Commissioner Patterson?
Sure. Thank you. You'd mentioned at this point they have not defined what a mass transit center is yet. However, there are requirements like the 6 units within a half mile. However, there's one large project that comes to mind, which is the light rail, which was within the target of our 2044 target zone here. And I'd imagine there's a pretty long runway to identify the area and place that goes and the development around it. So I was just curious, is there any specifics on that at this time of where that would go and what the development would be around that?
We do have some ideas, but Stephen, I think you're more up on that than I am.
So we have an ongoing transit study that's going to be looking at some of that information of figuring out what's going to be required from the state, what's going to be required from Sound Transit, and also how to coordinate with King County Metro and how we're going to build out our transit system so that we can have a little more comprehensive understanding of, okay, if light rail goes here, how do we increase the access to that via our transit system or any other mobility connections we can create in the city, and then build on that. Like now, can we build the trail systems around that? Can we build walking and biking? And that'll help kind of influence some of the discussion on, okay, housing, commercial, how does that build out, make it so we can make it a walkable area? We can achieve that vision for where this area is for light rail. And so those discussions are coming as part of some of this, and you'll get more information on that in the coming months as we discuss more on the land use and housing side, as well as the transportation side gets developed through the transit study.
And then I had one more question as far as the affordability, Mr. Stanger. So is there any type of data that shows the people that are utilizing affordable housing that are able to either move on to purchasing their own home or to be able to get out of that particular circumstance? Do we have any data points on that? That it was being utilized, that they were able to make the most of it? I mean, again, a positive thing. We all know that home ownership is a way towards middle class. So do you guys keep track of any of that information?
I believe that we have made an attempt to ask for information like that. It's kind of hard to gather from rental housing where we are not the property managers, and we're rarely aware of when they're leaving. But I think we may have tried to capture some of that voluntarily, and I'll try to see what we have.
Yeah, it'd be great to see, how successful the program is, find out benchmarks, things of that nature. Commissioner Altamore.
I don't know if I should offer these answers or not.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go for it.
So one of the things that I have run into, again, day job, so you have a bunch of capital sources that go into building these affordable units, and you have to go to the most restrictive of the capital sources and follow those rules for those 35 or 50 years. So for instance, Arch has a policy that says that they do have to move on if they reach a certain income threshold, but Home Dollars, which is a federal source that comes down through the county, says you cannot do that. And so you have to go with the Home Dollars. The city of Seattle has the levy, so they don't use Home Dollars, so the Home Dollars get spread out in the county, which is why you see that more outside of the city of Seattle than in the city of Seattle. So yes, a lot of the providers like Imagine Housing or or other providers would know that information, but often can't actually do anything about that. And so it's that relationship building, it's that engagement with your community versus the stick.
Thank you for that inside baseball. Commissioner Azmuete.
Yeah, so when housing units are allotted for the affordability, and let's say somebody, and this is piggybacking off of Commissioner Voice's question, and the individual or family that lives in that home moves out, is the developer or HOA or whichever have to provide that same unit for another family within those? Okay, I see you shaking your head.
Are you thinking of a home ownership?
Home ownership, yes.
So what happens there is that when the project is being built, then the developer and the city have an agreement or a covenant on the land that determines how which homes will be affordable and how they'll be sold and how the buyers will be qualified to buy them and so forth. Once when a buyer comes in and closes on the home, then they sign a covenant with the city. And when all the affordable homes are sold, then the agreement with the developer goes away because the developer is out of the picture now. So then the obligation is between the homeowner and the city, and one of the provisions there is when the homeowner wants to sell, then they contact Arch, and we begin the process of preparing, of setting the maximum price that they can sell it for, the eligibility of the next buyers, marketing the home, established or qualifying the potential buyer, and so forth, and then that buyer signs a covenant with the city, and just so it perpetuates in that way.
Okay, very well. So, and when you're selling that, or they're selling the home in concert or in collaboration with the city, market value wouldn't play a big role in that, or will it?
Only if the market is going down in price. There have been occasions where the market price is actually becomes lower than the maximum affordable price, because there's a formula attached to the resale pricing. If that happens, then the seller usually has to sell for less than that maximum affordable price.
Very well. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. I'll spare you all the pain of a round robin. Does anyone have any further questions as far as information that they want? Because I'd like to move on to vision. We want to supply staff with any suggestions as far as, or questions about the vision component. So again, I'll spare the round robin, but okay. And obviously, you can always email staff more information if it comes to you later. Moving on to vision. Anyone would like to either comment or add or speak about the vision that they want to see for this particular element of the comp plan? Commissioner Altamore.
Apologies in advance because this is kind of vague, but when I read this, it feels very now versus looking toward the future. So I would love to see something sort of aspirational in the wording there to say that we are, prepared for future changes that are coming within the community or even really the regional needs.
Great. That's a great suggestion. And these visions can come to you late at night. They don't have to happen here on the dais, so. Anyone else? Commissioner Patterson.
I'll read my note that I recorded on this. To me, the vision statement seems to be in line with the intent of the housing element. The housing element emphasizes the importance of housing as a vital component of a community. forming neighborhoods and contributing to the living environment. This idea is reflected in the vision statement's focus on preserving and enhancing neighborhoods. I think the vision statement acknowledges the need for improvement in housing opportunities for the city's diverse population and local workforce, which corresponds with the housing element's emphasis on promoting a mixture of housing types and affordability. So overall, the vision statement appears to capture the intent of the housing element by focusing on the preservation and enhancement of neighborhoods, as well as improving housing opportunities for a diverse population. Additionally, the mention of an updated analysis of existing housing, income levels, and other factors for the upcoming update shows that the city has a commitment to the data-driven decision-making and addressing the identified gaps in housing. So in summary, I think it's pretty good. I mean, anything can use improvement, but overall, I mean, I think that they mirror each other well enough to be in concert with each other.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Anyone else like to add to the vision? Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, so I had a very similar reaction to it as Commissioner Altamore, that it just felt like, almost like with the preserve being the first word, that means the status quo is okay. And so I don't know if it's just Xing that and starting with enhancing neighborhoods, because across the board, I don't think anyone's going to say, I don't want my neighborhood to be enhanced. And so maybe that would help with that, because I think starting with preserve doesn't feel very inspirational or aspirational. I think there's probably some nuance around like the affordability piece that we could add into here, as well as equity and all of that. But I'll leave it there. I'm not nearly as well thought out as Commissioner Patterson.
Commissioner Lewis. I wouldn't mind my neighborhood being enhanced.
My only comment on it was, I wish there was something that addressed the word growth, right? We know that our housing needs to be growing, and so I think somehow being able to have the word where we talk about the direction of where we're going. I wish I'd been as much of a futurist as you, but for me, that was what was missing, was knowing that more. How do we want to do more? So growth was the best word that I could think of, because I was like, oh, I know Kristen really likes, it's always good for us to be able to be like, well, tweak it a little, but it's always nice to have real comments, so.
All right, any further comments? Okay, well, again, you can always email staff with any ideas that come later, as far as vision or, again, information that you want. I believe that's it. Oh, no.
All right, well, there was just one other question, and it's, do you have any other topics, any other policies that you might want to discuss during this and, potentially include?
I am interested about, to Stephen's point, about how it works with the transportation facilities. Again, I won't name names, that would be rude. I've seen one particular east side city where I think they kind of built out their downtown core and lost its charm because they thought that's where their light rail was going to land. So that kind of concerns me. And again, that's why I like the element vision, preserve and enhance, but I can be persuaded to drop preserve. But again, keeping our neighborhoods looking, all while at the same time growing and being enhanced. But I'm thinking of a particular city that did not do that and changed the charm of their city, and not for the better. And it had a direct, it was directly because they were trying to plan for light rail. And I definitely wouldn't like to see that. I mean, I know we need to build infrastructure around those places, but that would be a concern of mine. Commissioner Altamore, Commissioner Lewis.
I'm just wondering if there has been an assessment of racially disparate policies that we could know about, that maybe historically that need to be addressed?
There has not.
There has not, okay.
No.
Okay.
But there's a lot of guidance on how we would do that, so we're hoping to capitalize on some opportunities on that. I don't have any clear answers at this point.
One thing I was going to ask, to piggyback on Commissioner Altamore real briefly, is is because Issaquah is a smaller township growing into a proper city, would some of that stuff even relate to us? I mean, we're not a Seattle, we're not a Bellevue. I mean, again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but like, you know, some of those things from the past, where Seattle might have gotten in trouble, would that even apply to Issaquah when we, I mean, like I said, I think we're what, 37,000 people? So, and that, how much have we grown in 15 years? So again, that's kind of my question. Because we're a smaller township, would those things really apply? I can see trying to build things in for the future, but how much looking back are we doing for what has been traditionally a town turning into a city proper?
No, I agree, and I don't think the size of the city, which is just over 40,000, I don't think the size of the city has anything to do with it. I think it has, you know, the government and how it's been governed in the past would have something to do with it. But I do agree, I don't think compared to other places, it's going to be as obvious or prevalent as it is in other places. But it's something we still need to look at. I mean, you know, maybe things that we haven't thought about before that even come into play. Yeah.
Thank you, Kristen. Commissioner Lewis?
You know, Krista, one thing I was trying to think about with this question is to really think of the flip side, and is to wonder, what is our boundary? What are we not willing to do, right? What are we we've talked a lot about what we want to consider, but what do we say in Issaquah is not on the table for us? And being able to clearly define that, I think, may help as we move forward. The transit example is a good one. You know, we recently, I think, as someone who's looked at it a lot, I'm a big proponent of the lid. I think we need a lid, much like Mercer Island. I think the 90 divides our community, and I think a lid would solve a lot of problems. And the idea that we would just let Sound Transit go wherever they think is best is, you haven't met Issaquah. We do things our own way, right? And so, you know, we recently applied for a grant, and we're denied by Olympia to be able to have that study done. Right, there's a lot of pre-steps that need to happen before we even think about placement. And so again, thinking about where are we not willing to put things, what are we not willing to do, might be an interesting way to also frame the conversation when we think about, you know, what is either the direction of the administration or a council or within the community that we know. It doesn't really matter what Sound Transit says. It doesn't really matter what a developer says. This is where we're not willing to bend.
Thank you.
Just a point of clarification, because it's not 100% clear to me where the previous point about just kind of harmful policies landed, because I think glossing over that or saying because we're small is in itself kind of a harmful practice. And so I want to make sure we give this, you know, these three kind of final new elements like their proper due, because unfortunately structural racism exists everywhere, and it exists in Issaquah, whether we want to say it does or not. And so I think we just need to be conscious of that, and who and what, you know, I don't know if there was like, there probably wasn't like redlining in the same way there was in Seattle and Issaquah, right? But that's not to say that there's not things that have been done that could have been done better. And so I think it's, you know, worth giving those three requirements their fair kind of time at the table.
All right. Fantastic discussion. Thank you, everybody. Is there anything anyone would like to add before we toss it back to staff? Okay. Kristen, is there one more? There's always
No,
one more.
we're really done this time. Thank you all.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Stanger, and thank you, Kristen. Fantastic presentation. I believe now we're going to move on to reports.
Okay, just one last word. If you're going to call her Kristen, you can call me Mike.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mike. Did sound a little formal saying Kristen and Mr. Stanger, but thank you, Mike. We always appreciate you coming in and helping educate us. All right, Kristen or Stephen, who wants to share the reports with us?
I'm looking at Kristen to make sure there's not one more thing before I start. So for council update, just a quick update with Title 18. Council's going to be holding a public hearing on Title 18 on April 17th. And then the planned adoption for Title 18 is May 1st. And so just wanted to update you on what's remaining of that project.
Some big dates for.
There's one more.
work.
Oh, there.
But on March 28th, there's going to be a discussion about the comprehensive plan with the Planning, Development, and Environmental Committee, if anybody wants to see that.
All right. Busy spring. Is there anything else staff would like to ask? Or present? Okay. I'm going to move on to other business and announcements. And I have some very bad news and sad news that I just learned this evening. This is Commissioner Lewis's last evening with us, and I'm very sad to hear that. Commissioner Lewis has not only been a leader and a fantastic commissioner to work with, her historical knowledge on our commission has been invaluable. So this is bad and sad news, not only for our commission, but also for our city. And on a personal note, I'm going to be losing a friend on this dais, so very sad, very bad news, but I know Joy will be rooting for us, wishing him the best, and providing us commentary whenever she feels like it. Commissioner Lewis, would you like to say anything?
I'm so grateful for my present and past commissioners and staff, right? We've had amazing support, and I'm so glad that I had the chance to serve. So thank you for that. That was very sweet.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Okay, no more sad and bad news.
May I say thank you?
Yes, actually, staff, please.
Yeah, so Joy, I've been on here since you have, actually, yeah, since you came on, but I've always appreciated how ridiculously prepared you have come to every single meeting, and it's hard work, and you've done it every time, and you've always been a good contributor to the meetings, and I've enjoyed getting to know you besides that. So just thank you so much for everything that you've put into this commission, because I know it means a lot to you, and it's been a lot to us.
Yes, second that. All right, everyone, if there is no further comments from the commissioners, anything else anyone would like to add, we are going to adjourn, and we will adjourn tonight's meeting at 7:56 p.m. Thank you and good night.